Picture this. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. The air still smells like dew, diesel, and last night's regrets, and most people are just stumbling toward their coffee makers. But for Ezra Blackwood, the newly minted landowner of Grandma Rose's property, mornings don't start with the aroma of bacon or birdsong. No, his mornings begin with Melody Whitmore, the self-appointed empress of Willowbrook Estates, a woman who treats her HOA presidency like she's running NATO, banging on his front gate and screaming about her rights. On this particular day, Melody wasn't just annoyed, she was volcanic. Red in the face, pearls clattering, and designer heels clicking on asphalt like a suburban woodpecker from hell. Behind her, a caravan of luxury cars stacked bumper to bumper, honking like they were stuck in Times Square traffic rather than outside some guy's country gate. Lexus, Mercedes, BMWs, the usual suspects of suburban wealth lined up like an overpriced car dealership. These weren't just cars, they were symbols, rolling reminders that this neighborhood measured power in horsepower and prestige in chrome. "Unlock that gate right now or I'm calling the police," Melody shrieked, voice cracking like she'd just swallowed gravel. And here's Ezra, 47 years old, recently divorced, sipping his coffee from the porch like he's watching a Netflix drama unfold in real life. Did he panic? Did he bow to the suburban overlords? Nope. He just leaned on the porch rail, mug in hand, and said, "Go ahead, call them. Ask them about trespassing laws." Pause. That's the exact moment this whole saga shifted from neighborly disagreement to gloves-off suburban cage match. Because what Melody didn't realize is that Ezra had inherited not just Grandma's 2-acre slice of heaven, but also her backbone, the kind forged from decades of lavender gardening, diesel grit, and a very healthy skepticism of anyone in a suit holding a clipboard. Let's rewind for a second. Grandma Rose wasn't some pushover. Back in 2019, when local vandals trashed her shed, she put up that gate to protect her property. But unlike the HOA's dictatorship-style rules, she played fair. Emergency services had the code. Postal workers had access. Friends and family could come and go. The gate wasn't there to inconvenience people. It was there to stop random teenagers from spray painting smiley faces on her barn. In other words, it was practical, sensible, entirely legal. But to Melody, it wasn't about sense or legality. It was about control. She didn't see a gate. She saw a threat, a breach in the HOA's unspoken rule that everything, even what doesn't belong to them, is theirs to boss around. In Melody's world, property rights don't exist if they inconvenience her morning latte run. So when Ezra locked that gate, she lost her mind. She didn't just want to unlocked, she demanded it unlocked, announcing at 7 a.m. that the gate must remain open 24/7 for resident convenience and property values. You've got to love the way HOAs wrap pure selfishness in a fancy bow of community benefit. Property values, resident convenience. Translation, my morning routine matters more than your legal boundaries. But Ezra didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just stood there, coffee in hand, letting the silence and sarcasm do the work. Because deep down, he knew something Melody didn't. This wasn't just a gate. This was a line in the sand. A metaphorical do not cross sign for every HOA dictator who thinks they can bully their way through private property. Neighbors honked, Melody fumed, and Ezra? He just locked eyes with her and enjoyed the chaos like it was breakfast theater. In that moment, he transformed from the new guy on Grandma's land to the ultimate suburban anti-hero, the man who dared to say no. Here's why this gate showdown matters. It set the tone for everything that followed. This wasn't just about a barrier of metal and hinges, it was about principle. About whether one man's inherited land meant more than an entire HOA's sense of entitlement. About whether personal property rights actually matter in a world where HOAs think they outrank the Constitution. And let's be honest, the irony is delicious. For years, the HOA used Ezra's land like their personal shortcut. No paperwork, no easement, just blind assumption that if we've been doing it, it must be okay. But the second Ezra closed the gate, suddenly he was the villain, the trespasser on his own property, the outlaw in their eyes. Which tells you everything you need to know about HOA logic. They're not mad about rules being broken, they're mad about rules being enforced against them. So what did we get from this first battle? A taste of what happens when an immovable object, private property rights, meets an unstoppable force, HOA tyranny. And spoiler alert, immovable objects have better lawyers. But if a locked gate sent Melody into meltdown mode, just wait until you hear what Ezra found buried in Grandma's old paperwork. a secret that flipped the entire neighborhood upside down.
If you thought the 7 a.m. gate standoff was dramatic, buckle in, because the real fireworks started when Ezra dusted off a stack of his grandmother's old paperwork. You know, the kind of faded, coffee-stained files most people shove in a shoebox and forget about? Yeah, those. Turns out Grandma Rose wasn't just a lavender-growing, shed-defending queen, she was also the accidental gatekeeper of a suburban legal landmine. See, back in 1985, some hotshot developer built Willowbrook Estates, 47 oversized McMansions complete with white picket fences, overpriced mailboxes, and HOAs sharp enough to make the IRS look like Santa Claus. But here's the kicker. Instead of building a proper road on their own property, the developer cut corners. Literally, they snuck 37 feet of road through Grandma Rose's land. No easement, no signed agreement, just a, hey, thanks, neighbor, handshake deal. And like the decent, trusting woman she was, Grandma Rose said yes. Fast forward 4 decades, and Ezra is sipping coffee on that very same land, except now his so-called neighbors aren't asking politely. They're demanding access, treating his property like their personal driveway as though the word trespassing never made it into their vocabulary. Melody Whitmore in particular acted like she'd been crowned the queen of concrete, insisting that her Lexus had more rights to that gravel than Ezra ever would. But Ezra isn't your average pushover. When Melody's tantrums escalated, he decided to dig deeper, and oh boy, what he found was juicier than a barbecue rib on the 4th of July. Among Grandma's files was the original 1960 survey, crisp, black and white, lines drawn so clearly even a toddler with crayons couldn't misinterpret it. That road? Undeniably, unquestionably, 100% cutting through his property. No paperwork granting access, no legal easement on file with the county, nothing but a 40-year-old shortcut wrapped in entitlement. And here's the best part. When Ezra marched this discovery to his lawyer, Sarah Martinez, a property rights specialist with the bite of a pit bull and the smile of someone who's ruined plenty of rich people's afternoons, she practically laughed him out of her office. Son, she flipped through the documents like she was skimming a gossip magazine, they've been trespassing for 40 years. You could lock that gate tomorrow and there's not a damn thing they could do about it. Let's pause and savor that. For decades, an entire neighborhood strutted around believing they were the rightful lords of the land. They fined residents over mailbox colors, timed people's trash cans, and micromanaged holiday decorations. Yet all the while, their golden road to suburban convenience was sitting on stolen property. It's the kind of twist that would make Shakespeare drop his quill and say, well played. But here's where it gets even better. Ezra didn't just keep this knowledge to himself. No, he let Melody stew in her ignorance while he slowly pieced the story together. He started talking to neighbors, the firefighter who'd been fined for his mailbox, the sweet lady who'd been scolded for Christmas lights, the families who lived in quiet fear of Melody's tape measure tyranny. And what he discovered was that the HOA wasn't just bossy, it was broken. People were miserable. They were trapped in a suburban dictatorship run by a woman who thought her SUV came with diplomatic immunity. This property line revelation was like dynamite under the HOA's throne. Suddenly, everything they thought they controlled, the rules, the fines, the power, meant nothing without that road. Melody's empire wasn't built on HOA bylaws, it was built on Grandma Rose's land. And now, that land belonged to Ezra. You want irony? Here's irony. Melody spent her life policing other people's grass height, but never once thought to check whether the road she drove on was actually legal. Turns out, while she was busy measuring blades of grass, the very ground beneath her wheels was never hers to claim. The fallout was immediate. The moment Ezra locked that gate and brandished his grandmother's paperwork like Excalibur, the HOA's carefully constructed illusion of authority started to crumble. For the first time, they realized they weren't the rulers of Willowbrook Estates. They were just guests, and their invitation had expired 40 years ago. And Ezra? He wasn't just holding a gate, he was holding leverage, the kind of leverage that flips suburban hierarchies upside down. Melody might have ruled the HOA, but Ezra ruled the land it depended on. That's not just a win, that's checkmate in the opening round. But Melody wasn't about to roll over. Oh no, she launched into the HOA's favorite sport, filing complaints like confetti at a pity parade. And that's where the saga takes its next wild turn. The Complaint Olympics. If HOA drama were an Olympic sport, Melody Whitmore wouldn't just compete. She'd sweep gold, silver, and bronze, then demand the judges repaint the podium because the shade of bronze didn't match the HOA-approved color palette. And once Ezra locked that gate, she officially entered competition mode. See, Melody wasn't the kind of person to take defeat quietly. She thrived on control, and when control slipped through her manicured fingers, she reached for her other weapon of choice, bureaucracy. Forget logical discussions or compromise. Melody's strategy was simple. Bury Ezra under a mountain of complaints until he either caved or choked on the paperwork. It started small, like all dictatorships do. Day 4 of the gate standoff, Ezra received his first official notice from the county. According to the anonymous report, he was illegally storing commercial vehicles on his property. Translation, his diesel work trucks parked neatly in his own driveway were suddenly a matter of state concern. Ezra looked at the letter, looked at his trucks, and laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. But Melody wasn't done. Day 6, noise complaint. Apparently, Ezra starting his work at 6:30 a.m. was a crime against suburban tranquility. Never mind that her own husband, Brad, revved up his Mercedes every morning at 6:15 sharp, 5 minutes earlier than Ezra's diesel engines. Hypocrisy? Melody didn't even know how to spell it. By day 8, things got creative. An EPA complaint landed in Ezra's mailbox, accusing him of illegal dumping. The supposed hazardous waste? His compost pile. You know, the one filled with grass clippings and vegetable scraps, the kind of stuff eco-friendly counties usually encourage. Ezra read the letter, sighed, and tossed it into the trash with a satisfying thud. Now let's pause and admire the artistry here. Melody wasn't just harassing Ezra, she was wasting taxpayer money, burning up county resources, and turning public offices into her personal weapons depot. Officials had to investigate every single claim, no matter how ridiculous. Imagine being the poor inspector tasked with writing a report on Ezra's compost pile. Observation: resident is attempting to recycle banana peels. Recommendation: stop wasting my time. But here's where Melody miscalculated. Instead of isolating Ezra, her complaint spree started to backfire. Neighbors began whispering. They'd all seen her antics before. Some had been fined for leaving Christmas lights up past January 2nd. Others had been chastised for non-regulation mailboxes. They knew Melody's pattern. When she couldn't control someone, she tried to crush them with paperwork. Ezra was just her newest target. And Ezra? He wasn't intimidated. Every complaint letter went straight into his growing evidence file. Each bogus claim added another brick to the wall he was building against her. He knew the law. He knew harassment when he saw it. And he knew that every inspector shaking their head as they left his property was another nail in Melody's credibility coffin. Here's the thing about bullies. They think volume equals victory. Melody believed that if she filed enough complaints, one would eventually stick. But Ezra understood the deeper truth. Facts are stubborn things, and facts were on his side. His trucks were legal, his compost was legal, his noise levels were legal. The only thing illegal in this equation was Melody's abuse of the system. By the time complaint number 5 rolled around, Ezra had stopped even getting annoyed. He turned it into a routine. Coffee? Check. Morning paper? Check. Another frivolous complaint from Melody? Right on schedule. It became so predictable he joked about starting a betting pool with his buddies. Today's complaint: zoning violation or witchcraft? The Complaint Olympics revealed something crucial. Melody wasn't just power-hungry, she was desperate. She'd lost the first battle at the gate, she'd been exposed on the property line issue, and now she was throwing paperwork like spaghetti at a wall, praying something would stick. But all it did was show the neighborhood how unhinged she'd become. And here's where the satire writes itself. While Melody spent her days weaponizing bureaucracy, Ezra spent his nights digging through legal documents, uncovering truths she never wanted exposed. She thought she was drowning him in paperwork. In reality, she was fueling his determination, giving him more evidence, more leverage, and more reason to fight. By week 2, the tide had shifted. Neighbors started rolling their eyes at Melody's rants. County inspectors started treating her calls like bad comedy. And Ezra? He just kept sipping coffee, gate locked, waiting for her next move.
If the complaint Olympics was Melody's idea of a counterattack, Ezra's response was the equivalent of a legal nuclear strike. Forget noise complaints, compost conspiracies, and HOA hissy fits. This was hard, cold, undeniable fact. And it came in the form of a county survey. Here's the setup. Ezra knew Melody's threats weren't just hot air. She wasn't going to stop at complaints. No, Melody was the type to escalate until the whole county council was choking on HOA drama. And, sure enough, one morning the mailman dropped off a certified letter so thick it could have doubled as a phone book. Inside, 3 pages of lawyerly fury claiming Ezra's gate was illegally blocking public access to essential services. Oh, and the kicker? It had 23 signatures from neighbors who apparently thought signing petitions was more binding than, actual property law. Now, Ezra could have panicked. He could have spent sleepless nights worrying about HOA lawyers circling like sharks. But remember, this man had been through a divorce. He'd learned the hard way that legal threats are often just that, threats. And instead of folding, he called the one person Melody never expected, the county surveyor's office. "Hi, I'd like to request a formal boundary survey, at county expense, of course, since there seems to be some confusion about where public roads end and private property begins." Translation: if Melody wanted to play legal chess, Ezra just moved his queen across the board. 3 days later, the cavalry arrived. Big white trucks, GPS equipment, metal detectors, surveyors who'd seen more property lines than Melody had pearls in her jewelry box. They spent 6 hours mapping every disputed inch of land. Ezra sat on his porch the whole time, sipping coffee, watching Melody pace her driveway like a caged tiger. Every beep of that surveyor's equipment was another nail in her credibility coffin. And then the results dropped. Beautiful, glorious results. 37 feet and 8 inches of road, undeniably on Ezra's property. 0 recorded easements and county records, nada, zilch. The original 1985 permits. Clear as day, the developer was supposed to build access entirely within HOA boundaries. Instead, they cut through Grandma Rose's land like it was their personal shortcut. 40 years of trespassing exposed in a neat little survey packet. Ezra didn't just keep this to himself. Oh no. He did what any modern warrior would do. He posted the official survey on the neighborhood Facebook page. Facts matter, and Ezra had just uploaded the suburban equivalent of a smoking gun. Cue the meltdown. Within 30 minutes, Melody was on Facebook screaming fake news, claiming Ezra was mentally unstable, a dangerous veteran, and a threat to neighborhood safety. For the record, Ezra had never served a day in the military, had never threatened anyone, and was perfectly sane, though watching Melody unravel online was probably better therapy than anything his divorce lawyer ever suggested. Neighbors watched in disbelief. Screenshots flew faster than HOA fines at Christmas. Some laughed, some shook their heads, but the tide was turning. For years, Melody had ruled with intimidation. Now, Ezra had receipts. Cold, undeniable, legal receipts. And neighbors were starting to realize the emperor had no clothes. The survey wasn't just paperwork. It was proof. Proof that Ezra wasn't the bad guy. Proof that the HOA had been trespassing. Proof that Melody's entire power trip was built on a foundation of lies and shortcuts. And when proof enters the chat, paranoia doesn't stand a chance. Here's the beauty of this moment. Melody wanted to frame the fight as Ezra versus the community, one man standing in the way of 47 families. But the survey flipped the script. It wasn't Ezra blocking them, it was the HOA stealing from him. Suddenly, Ezra wasn't a villain, he was a victim, and a damn smart one at that. For Melody, this was catastrophic. Her credibility crumbled. Her reputation cracked, and her little empire of fines and fear began to collapse under the weight of one simple truth. She didn't own the road. She never had. And now everyone knew it. Ezra? He just kept sipping his coffee, smiling at the chaos unfolding online. Because he knew something Melody didn't. Once the truth comes out, no amount of pearl clutching can put it back in the box. But if you thought this survey was the climax, think again. Because while Ezra was busy dropping truth bombs, he uncovered a secret buried in county records that turned this HOA squabble into a full-blown scandal. 40 years of developer fraud. And that's where things went from neighborhood drama to national headline material. Every suburban empire has a skeleton buried somewhere. For Willowbrook Estates, it wasn't just one skeleton, it was an entire boneyard of shady paperwork and corner cutting. And when Ezra dug into the past, he unearthed something so explosive it made Melody's tantrums look like child's play. Let's rewind to 1985. Big hair, bad perms, neon fashion, and one developer with dollar signs in his eyes. Willowbrook Estates was supposed to be the crown jewel of the county, 47 McMansions tucked neatly behind pristine lawns and plastic smiles. But building that suburban dream wasn't cheap. Roads, drainage systems, infrastructure, all of it cost serious money. And this developer, he decided he'd rather save a buck than follow the rules. Instead of laying down proper access roads within the HOA's own land, he pulled the oldest trick in the book, cut a corner. Literally. He bulldozed a 37-foot strip through Grandma Rose's property. No permits, no easements, just a casual, don't worry, nobody will notice. And for decades, nobody did. The HOA strutted around like kings and queens of their cul-de-sac kingdom, completely oblivious to the fact that their golden road was technically stolen. Melody Whitmore wasn't protecting community access. She was defending a 40-year fraud. When Ezra's lawyer, Sarah Martinez, and her paralegal, Jenny, stumbled across the original development permits, it was like opening Pandora's box. Buried in faded county records was a smoking gun. The builder had lied on his permit application, claimed the roads would be entirely within HOA boundaries, signed his name on official documents, then, like a magician pulling a sleight of hand, he shoved the road through Grandma Rose's land and never told a soul. Think about that. An entire neighborhood built on a lie. 40 years of families paying HOA dues, bragging about their property values, and honking impatiently at Ezra's gate, all while their very access to the outside world depended on developer fraud. It wasn't just trespassing, it was criminal. And suddenly, Melody and her HOA weren't just bullies, they were accomplices. Now, here's where the irony slaps you in the face. Melody had spent years terrorizing her neighbors over Christmas lights, mailbox colors, and lawnites, claiming she was protecting the community, but the whole time she was driving on stolen property. She was the queen of a castle built on sand, and Ezra had just pulled the tide out. Ezra didn't need to scream. He didn't need to threaten. He just laid out the paperwork like a poker player revealing a royal flush. And the neighborhood started to see the truth. Melody wasn't protecting them. She was endangering them. Every lawsuit, every fight, every threat hinged on a road they had no legal right to. The fallout? Catastrophic. Imagine realizing your multi-million-dollar home depends on access through a road that doesn't legally exist. That your property values, your commutes, your daily life are all built on 40 years of fraud. Suddenly, Melody's rants about community convenience sounded less like leadership and more like desperate cover-ups. And Ezra? He became the accidental whistleblower, a diesel mechanic turned suburban detective unraveling a decades-old crime with nothing but coffee, stubbornness, and a refusal to bow to HOA tyranny. Neighbors started whispering, some in fear, some in awe. Dorothy Chen admitted she'd suspected something shady when her husband's old land records didn't match up. Marcus Raid, the firefighter, started asking what would happen if the county stepped in. The questions spread like wildfire. Could the county condemn the road? Could homeowners sue the developer's estate? Would their properties lose value overnight? And through it all, Ezra just stood at his gate, sipping coffee, watching the umpire HOA arrogance crumble under the weight of one undeniable truth. They'd been trespassing for 40 years. Here's the beauty of the dirty secret. It shifted the entire narrative. Before, Melody had painted Ezra as the villain, the stubborn outsider blocking access. But after the fraud came to light, Ezra wasn't the bad guy anymore. He was the guy holding the receipts, the guy who uncovered a crime, the guy standing between the HOA and a disaster they didn't even know they were sitting on. And Melody, She did what all cornered dictators do. She doubled down. Instead of admitting the truth, she raged harder. Accused Ezra of faking documents, called him mentally unstable, screamed fake news at county officials. But the harder she fought, the more ridiculous she looked. Because you can't fight paperwork, you can't argue with permits, and you can't cover up a lie that's already been dragged into the sunlight. But while Melody was busy denying reality, Ezra uncovered something even uglier than developer fraud. It turned out the HOA queen wasn't just power-hungry, she was also siphoning money like a suburban mob boss. And when the embezzlement bombshell dropped, it shook Willowbrook Estates to its core.
If you thought the road fraud was the HOA's biggest skeleton, think again. Because buried underneath all that legal trickery was a financial bombshell that made neighbors' jaws drop harder than a foreclosure auctioneer's gavel. Melody Whitmore wasn't just the self-crowned queen of Willowbrook Estates. She was also the treasurer of her own little crime syndicate. And the receipts told a story of embezzlement so bold it could have landed her a cameo on American Greed. Here's how it unraveled. While Ezra was busy sipping coffee and watching Melody combust on Facebook, his legal pitbull, Sarah Martinez, and her paralegal, Jenny, were digging deeper into the HOA's records. And when they pulled the financials, it was like peeling back the wallpaper in a fixer-upper and finding black mold crawling up the studs. First red flag, unpaid bills. Not just one or two. We're talking about nearly $50,000 owed to Green Valley Maintenance, the local landscaping contractor who'd been keeping Willowbrook's lawns trimmed and trees upright after storms. This wasn't pocket change. This was real work. Storm cleanups, emergency tree removals, debris hauling, all authorized with Melody's fancy HOA signature. But the payments vanished into thin air. Second red flag, luxury expenses disguised as office supplies. One receipt showed a weekend at a luxury hotel spa billed as a board retreat. Another listed designer handbags as meeting materials. If Melody ever claimed a Louis Vuitton purse helped her manage HOA finances, she had bigger issues than Ezra's locked gate. Third red flag, credit card advances. Thousands of dollars withdrawn from the HOA account with zero documentation. No votes, no approvals, just Melody's magic pen turning community funds into her personal ATM. By the time Sarah's team finished tallying the numbers, the total hit $87,000 in irregularities over 2 years. $87,000. To put that in perspective, that's more than double the annual dues collected from the 47 households in Willowbrook. She hadn't just mismanaged the budget, she'd siphoned it like a vampire with a Platinum Awards card. Here's the kicker. While Melody was running around screaming about Ezra's illegal compost pile, she was sitting on financial crimes that could send her straight to prison. It was projection at its finest. Distract the neighbors with bogus fines, while behind the curtain she was juggling unpaid contractors, hidden debts, and luxury shopping sprees. And the fallout? Oh, it was glorious. Miguel Santos, the owner of Green Valley Maintenance, wasn't just frustrated, he was furious. The man had worked 20 years in the community, showing up during emergencies, clearing storm damage before kids even woke up for school. And what did he get for it? An unpaid tab so big, it forced him to file a mechanics lien against Willowbrook's common areas. Translation, if the HOA didn't pay up, the playground, the trails, and even the landscaped entrance could legally be sold off to cover the debt. Imagine explaining that to potential home buyers. Welcome to Willowbrook Estates, where your kids can't play on the swings because the HOA president stiffed the landscaper. Property values? Meet your worst nightmare. The neighborhood's reaction was swift. Dorothy Chen, who'd already been side-eyeing Melody's leadership, started baking cookies for Ezra as a peace offering. She told us you were dangerous, but she's the one stealing from us. Others followed. Marcus Reed, firefighter extraordinaire, confirmed that emergency services never had an issue with Ezra's gate. Melody had made that up, too. The cracks in her empire were canyons. And Ezra? He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to shout. He just let the receipts do the talking. Because nothing destroys a dictator faster than their own paper trail. Every fraudulent expense, Every forged signature, every unpaid bill, it all painted the picture of a woman who wasn't a protector of property values, but a parasite feeding off her neighbors. What's wild is how close Melody came to pulling it off. If Ezra hadn't stood his ground, if Sarah hadn't dug into the records, the neighbors might have paid emergency assessments to cover debts they never knew existed. They would have shouldered Melody's crimes without ever realizing it. Instead, they got a front row seat to her implosion. And here's the irony. Melody just framed herself as the guardian of property values, but nothing crashes a neighborhood faster than financial fraud. She wasn't protecting Willowbrook, she was torching it from the inside out. The embezzlement bombshell didn't just destroy her credibility, it lit a fire under the neighbors. For the first time, they weren't afraid to question her. They weren't afraid to push back. And when they realized Ezra was the only one standing up to her, alliances began to shift. The so-called hermit with the locked gate became the guy who'd expose the HOA queen's corruption. And just when Melody thought things couldn't get worse, Ezra dropped the move nobody saw coming, the suburban equivalent of flipping the Monopoly board and declaring, "I own this whole street now." Yep, it was time for the road-buying checkmate.
Up until this point, Ezra had been fighting defensive battles. He locked his gate. He dodged Melody's complaint grenades. He countered with facts, surveys, and paperwork. But what happened next wasn't defense. It was offense. It was the kind of move that makes suburban legends. The kind of checkmate that flips the board, the table, and the HOA's collective sanity in one fell swoop. Ezra didn't just block the road. He bought it. Here's how it went down. Buried in the county's public auction notices, Sarah's paralegal Jenny spotted a little gem, Lot 47A, a 1.2-acre strip of land, the very same strip that contained the main road into Willowbrook Estates. Turns out the previous owner had died, the estate couldn't pay back taxes, and the county was gearing up to sell it off. Minimum bid? Just over $12,000. Estimated auction price? Maybe $15,000 to $20,000 tops. Let's pause and appreciate the irony. For less than the price of a used Toyota Corolla, Ezra could own the single piece of infrastructure that 47 families depended on to leave their neighborhood. Melody's empire, her Lexus convoys, her HOA fiefdom, all of it funneled through a strip of land now sitting on the county auction block. When Ezra first heard it, he almost choked on his coffee. Buy the road? Was that even possible? Sarah grinned like a chess master who just spotted checkmate 3 moves away. Not only is it possible, she said, it's the smartest power move you'll ever make. They want access? They're going to need you, permanently. So Ezra got his ducks in a row. Financing pre-approval? Check. Legal paperwork? Check. Confidence? Through the roof. He wasn't just playing defense anymore. He was about to own the HOA's lifeline. Auction day rolled around, and the county courthouse was buzzing like it was Black Friday at Walmart. Neighbors showed up with coffee cups, reporters rolled in with cameras, and there, front and center, was Melody Whitmore, clutching a certified check like it was her golden ticket. Her face was pale, her hands were trembling, but she was ready to fight. Lot 47A, 1.2 acres, the auctioneer barked. Minimum bid $12,400. Do I hear 15? Melody's hand shot up. 15, she snapped, voice cracking. Ezra waited 3 seconds. Calm. Cool. 17.5. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just a bid, this was war, played out in real time on courthouse steps. 20,000, Melody countered, her voice wobbling. 22.5, Ezra replied, sipping coffee like he was ordering at Starbucks. The tension built. 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Neighbors were on their toes, whispering, is he really going to do it? Finally, Melody threw her last card. 25, she shouted, desperation dripping from every syllable. Ezra smiled, took one slow sip of his coffee, then said, almost casually, 30,000. The gavel came down with a thundering crack. Sold to Mr. Ezra Blackwood for $30,000. Silence. Then murmurs. Then outright laughter. Melody collapsed against Brad like a marionette with its strings cut. 6 years of her dictatorship ended with one slam of wood on wood. Ezra didn't just own his gate anymore. He owned their road. The HOA queen bee had been dethroned by the one guy she thought she could bully. Here's why this move was genius. Up until then, Melody had been spinning narratives. Ezra was the villain, the hermit, the dangerous outsider. But the second he bought that road, the story shifted. He wasn't an outsider. He was the owner, the man who had the ultimate leverage. And leverage beats intimidation every time. Neighbors understood immediately. Ezra didn't have to shout. He didn't have to threaten. He just had to wave the deed in their faces. Their commutes, their property values, their very convenience now depended on him. It wasn't extortion. It wasn't revenge. It was cold, legal, undeniable ownership. And the best part? Ezra didn't slam the door on them. He didn't demand bribes or hold them hostage. He simply offered terms. Reasonable, fair, transparent. That move turned him from enemy of the HOA to the man who saved the neighborhood from Melody's insanity. Melody, meanwhile, looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. All her threats, her fines, her complaints, worthless. She couldn't bully Ezra anymore. She couldn't override him with HOA rules, because the HOA had no jurisdiction over the man who literally owned the asphalt under their tires. It was checkmate. And it was beautiful. But buying the road wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a neighborhood uprising. Because once Ezra flipped the script, the neighbors didn't just side with him, they turned on Melody. And the mutiny that followed? Oh, it was glorious. If Ezra buying the road was the thunderclap, the mutiny that followed was the lightning strike that split Melody's empire in half. Up until that moment, Willowbrook Estates had been a monarchy with one pearl-clad queen, Melody Whitmore. She barked orders, collected fines, and treated the HOA like her personal court. But after Ezra's checkmate move, the peasants revolted, and oh, it was spectacular. Let's set the stage. The day after the auction, the neighborhood Facebook page exploded like fireworks show over a gas station. First came the shock posts. Wait, Ezra owns the road now? Like, legally owns it? Does that mean the HOA has no authority over him? Are we trespassing every time we leave the subdivision? Then came the memes. Someone photoshopped Ezra in a crown, holding a coffee mug that said, King of the Road. Another edited a Monopoly board so Willowbrook Estate sat on Ezra's property. Within 24 hours, Ezra went from villain to folk hero, the man who done what no one else dared, put Melody in her place. But here's the best part. Neighbors who once cowered under Melody's rule suddenly found their spines. Dorothy Chen, the sweet grandma with the HOA-approved rose bushes, finally said what everyone was thinking. If Ezra can fight her and win, so can we. And just like that, the cracks in Melody's empire turned into fissures. The mutiny started with whispers, homeowners quietly questioning dues. Where's our money going? Why haven't contractors been paid? Why do our finances look like Swiss cheese? Thanks to Ezra's receipts, they already knew the answer. Melody had been bleeding them dry, but now they said it out loud. And when fear breaks, it doesn't creep, it cascades. Marcus Reed, the firefighter, was the first to act. He called for a special board meeting. Legally, all it took was signatures from 20% of homeowners. Within hours, he had 35%. By the end of the week, it was over 70%. Melody couldn't stop it. She couldn't bury it. She couldn't fine her way out. The mutiny was official. At that infamous board meeting, Melody arrived with a binder thicker than a wedding cake. Her plan? Intimidate, dominate, steamroll. But instead of applause, she was met with crossed arms and cold stares. Ezra sat in the back, sipping coffee, watching the show. The meeting started politely. Marcus read out the petition for Melody's removal. Dorothy seconded it. Then the floor opened and the floodgates burst. Miguel Santos, the landscaper, still owed nearly $50,000, stood up and thundered, I cleaned your storm debris for 10 years. You spent our money on handbags while stiffing my workers. You think this is leadership? His voice shook the room harder than any gavel. Another neighbor pulled out screenshots of Melody's Facebook rants. You called Ezra dangerous. You told us he was mentally unstable, but he's the one who uncovered the fraud, not you. Then came the receipts. Ezra's lawyer, Sarah, had shared enough documents with the group to make their case airtight. The missing funds, the unpaid bills, the lies about emergency services. Every word Melody had weaponized against Ezra came back like a boomerang and smacked her square in the face.
When it was turn for Melody to speak, she tried her usual routine. Deflect, deny, dramatize. This is a witch hunt. Ezra is manipulating you. He forged those documents. But nobody bought it. The HOA wasn't her court anymore. It was a jury, and the verdict was already in. The vote, brutal. 39 in favor of removal, 4 abstaining, and only 3 clinging to her like lifeboats on the Titanic. Effective immediately, Melody Whitmore was stripped of her presidency. Her reign of terror ended not with applause, but with the sound of neighbors packing up her binder and escorting her out of the meeting like yesterday's trash. And the energy shift? Palpable. For the first time in years, people breathed freely. Parents let their kids play outside without worrying about HOA spies with tape measurers. Couples repainted their mailboxes without fear of fines. Dorothy even strung up Christmas lights in July just because she could. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was liberated. Ezra didn't cheer. He didn't gloat. He just smiled into his coffee because he understood something the others were just starting to realize. Melody wasn't the HOA. She was just a symptom. And now, without her, Willowbrook Estates had a chance to reinvent itself. But just as the dust began to settle, Ezra delivered his boldest move yet, rewriting the rules of the neighborhood itself. Because when you own the road, you don't just change the game, you become the game master.
After the HOA mutiny, Willowbrook Estates was like a kingdom without a king. Melody was gone. Her binder of bogus fines packed away, her iron grip snapped like a cheap lawn chair under too much weight. But here's the thing about power vacuums. If you don't fill them, chaos does. And Ezra, he wasn't about to let 40 years of HOA nonsense creep back in through the cracks. He didn't just defend his rights. He went one step further. He rewrote the rules of the entire neighborhood. Remember, Ezra now owned the main road, the artery, the lifeline. Without his blessing, no HOA decree, no approved paint swatch, no lawn inspection carried any real teeth. And the neighbors knew it. They weren't afraid of bylaws anymore. They were looking to Ezra like he was the sheriff in a one-stoplight town. But here's the twist. Ezra wasn't power hungry. He wasn't Melody 2.0 in work boots and diesel cologne. He had no interest in controlling what color Dorothy painted her mailbox or whether Marcus's kids played basketball past 9 p.m. What Ezra wanted was freedom, and he figured his neighbors wanted the same thing. So instead of slapping down arbitrary rules, Ezra drafted something radical, simple, beautiful, a neighbor's Bill of Rights, 10 commandments for suburban sanity, pinned right at the entrance of Willowbrook where the HOA's old plaque used to sit. It read like a mic drop carved in stone. Thy mailbox color is thy business. Christmas lights may twinkle whenever thy heart desires. Compost piles are not crimes against humanity. Trucks, boats, and RVs are welcome, provided they don't block fire hydrants. Noise after 10 p.m.? Be courteous. But if it's a backyard barbecue, invite the neighbors. Landscaping fines are abolished. Mother Nature doesn't work on an HOA schedule. Emergency services will always have priority access. Period. Community funds, if collected, will be transparent, audited, and used only for actual needs. Neighbors resolve disputes over coffee or beer, not complaint letters. And no one, and I mean no one, owns your front yard except you. Boom. Just like that, decades of petty tyranny went up in smoke. The reaction? Electric. Dorothy strung up Valentine's lights in February. Marcus parked his fire truck-themed RV proudly in his driveway for the first time ever. Miguel, the landscaper, actually volunteered to fix the entrance sign, pro bono, just because he finally felt respected instead of exploited. Ezra didn't stop there. He met with county officials to codify access agreements. He made sure emergency services always had the gate code. He even set up a neighborhood text thread, not for gossip or HOA threats, but for real community alerts. Storm knocked down a tree, Miguel's crew was on it. Dorothy baking cookies, come grab some. It was functional, friendly, and, for once, neighborly. Here's the kicker. Property values didn't tank. In fact, they started to climb. Turns out buyers were lining up for a subdivision where freedom trumped fines. Realtors started marketing Willowbrook as the HOA-free community, and suddenly Ezra's once contentious gate was a selling point. Who wouldn't want to live in a place where you could paint your door teal without begging for permission? Meanwhile, Dorothy sat stewing in her McMansion like a dethroned monarch, powerless and ignored. Her frantic emails about illegal mailboxes went unanswered. Her threats to call the county fell flat. Without the road, without the money, without the fear, she was just another neighbor, and one nobody wanted to barbecue with. The brilliance of Ezra's rewrite wasn't just the content, it was the delivery. He didn't come in swinging like a dictator, he came in calm, steady, coffee mug in hand, offering freedom where there had once been fear, and that's why it worked. People didn't just follow the new rules, they embraced them. For the first time in Willowbrook's history, neighbors weren't side-eyeing each other over mailbox paint or grass height. They were waving from driveways, trading tools, lending hands during storms. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it all started because one man refused to bow to an HOA queen who thought pearls were a crown. But the story doesn't end with rewritten rules. No, the finale is even sweeter. Ezra didn't just win for himself. He became a symbol for every homeowner across America trapped under HOA tyranny. And that last chapter, it turned his little neighborhood war into a movement.
Every good war story ends with a hero. And in Willowbrook Estates, that hero wasn't a politician, a lawyer, or a billionaire swooping in with deep pockets. It was Ezra Blackwood, a man with a coffee mug, a locked gate, and a stubborn refusal to be pushed around by a pearl-clutching dictator in high heels. What started as a local squabble over a gate ended as something far bigger. A suburban legend, a cautionary tale, and a rallying cry for homeowners across the country. Word spread fast. First, it was county news. Local man buys road, HOA implodes. Then regional media picked it up. Headlines like, David versus Goliath, resident outsmarts HOA by purchasing road, flooded Facebook feeds. And soon national outlets sniffed a story too good to ignore. Talk shows, podcasts, YouTube commentary channels, everyone wanted to cover the man who had flipped the HOA playbook upside down. Ezra became the face of resistance. Homeowners from across the U.S. and even abroad began sending him letters, emails, and messages. Some shared horror stories about HOA harassment, being fined for leaving a bike in the driveway, being told to remove a tree swing, being punished for planting the wrong flowers. Others simply thanked him for proving that the little guy could fight back and win. And here's where it gets beautiful. Ezra didn't cash in on his fame. He didn't launch a merch line or sell King of the Road mugs, though, let's be honest, he could have made a fortune. Instead, he used his platform to educate. With Sarah's help, he started speaking at town halls, appearing on community podcasts, and even guest writing op-eds. His message was simple but powerful. Know your rights, check the paperwork, and never assume the HOA is infallible. Neighbors who once side-eyed Ezra for being the guy with the locked gate now saw him as a mentor. He taught them how to read deeds, how to request surveys, how to file open records requests. Dorothy Chen joked, Ezra gave us more useful knowledge in 3 weeks than Melody gave us in 6 years. But perhaps the most enduring part of Ezra's legacy wasn't legal, but cultural. Willowbrook Estates transformed. Where there had once been fear, there was freedom. Where there had once been suspicion, there was trust. Barbecues became regular events. Kids decorated their bikes for 4th of July parades. Miguel's landscaping crew got paid on time, with community members volunteering to pitch in after storms. For the first time, the neighborhood felt like a community, not a dictatorship. And Melody? She became a ghost of her former self. Rumor had it she tried to run for HOA president in another neighborhood a few miles away, but when residents Googled her name and found the $87,000 embezzlement scandal, her candidacy evaporated faster than an ice cube in Texas heat. She was no longer a queen, just another homeowner, stripped of her power, stuck with her own bitterness. The legacy wasn't just about winning against Melody. It was about proving that ordinary people could challenge extraordinary arrogance. Ezra's story became a modern parable. One man, armed with coffee, persistence, and an act for paperwork, took down an entire system of suburban tyranny. And here's the kicker. His victory didn't just protect his rights. It inspired others to fight for theirs. Across forums, social media groups, and neighborhood meetings, people started using a new phrase, Poll and Ezra. It meant standing your ground.
It meant digging into the records. It meant refusing to be steamrolled by bureaucratic bullies. From HOA victim to symbol of resistance, Ezra Blackwood didn't just lock a gate, he unlocked a movement. So what's the legacy of Willowbrook Estates? Not the petty fines, not the pearl-clutching power trips, not even the fraud and corruption. No, the legacy is simple, a reminder that communities don't thrive under dictators. They thrive under respect, fairness, and a willingness to share cookies with your neighbor instead of complaint letters. And Ezra? He's still there. Porch chair, coffee mug, gate locked, watching, waiting. Not because he has to, but because sometimes the best way to protect freedom is to remind people you're willing to. So, the next time your HOA threatens you over your lawn height, your mailbox paint, or your Christmas lights, remember Willowbrook, remember Ezra, and ask yourself, do you want to bow down, or do you want to pull an Ezra? If you enjoyed this wild ride through suburban warfare, hit that like button, subscribe for more HOA battles, and drop a comment with your own HOA horror story. Who knows? Your fight might be the next legend.